The asphalt was scorching hot that July afternoon, but the blood pooling around the tiny, scuffed Spider-Man sneaker was chillingly cold. Big Jasper Lawson, a man who had built his life on intimidation and the roar of a Harper Davison, fell to his knees. He didn't cry when he did 5 years in San Quentin. He didn't cry when the rival Mongols burned his garage to the ground. But as he looked at the fragile, 6-year-old boy, bleeding out on the pavement, a ragged kid from the trailer park who had just thrown his frail body in front of a spray of bullets meant for Jasper's only daughter, the giant biker, shattered. A debt of blood was just forged, and what happened next would change the Hells Angels forever. Oildale, California, is a place where dreams usually dry up and blow away with the tumbleweeds and the exhaust of passing 18-wheelers. On the ragged edge of town sat the Sunnyside Trailer Park, a rusted collection of single-wides that had seen better decades. In trailer, #44 lived 6-year-old Luca. Luca was small for his age, with ribs that showed through his hand-me-down t-shirts and wide, watchful blue eyes. His mother, Brenda, was a ghost of a parent, perpetually lost in a haze of cheap vodka and bad decisions. Luca practically raised himself. He knew how to scavenge for stale cereal, how to hide when Brenda's loud, angry boyfriends came over, and how to stay completely invisible. But across the chain-link fence from Sunnyside was a different world entirely. It was the heavily fortified clubhouse of the local Hells Angels charter. To the rest of the town, the compound was a fortress of fear. To little Luca, it was a palace of fascinating giants. He would sit for hours behind a rusted dumpster, peering through the diamond-shaped holes in the fence, captivated by the gleaming chrome, the thunderous roar of the V-twin engines, and the men in their heavy leather cuts adorned with the winged death head. The undisputed king of this world was Anthony Big Jasper Lawson. Standing 6'4", with a beard like steel wool and arms covered in faded prison ink, Jasper was the president of the charter. He was a man who commanded absolute authority, ruling his brotherhood with an iron fist. But Jasper had one glaring vulnerability: his 7-year-old daughter, Charlotte. Jasper's wife had died of a sudden aneurysm 3 years prior. Since then, Charlotte was the center of the bikers' rough universe. She was a bright, laughing girl with blonde pigtails who wore tiny leather vests, custom-made by the club's tailor. The men hardened felons, brawlers, and outlaws like Declan Ghost O'Rourke, the sergeant-at-arms, and Theodore Wrench Gilbert treated Charlotte like royalty. They would stop mid-curse if she walked into the yard. They brought her coloring books alongside their crates of beer. Luca watched them from the dirt. He saw how Big Jasper would lift Charlotte onto the gas tank of his custom chopper, her laughter ringing out over the idle of the engine. Luca didn't understand the patches, the outlaw lifestyle, or the violence that shadowed the men. All he saw was a family. He saw men who protected their own. He saw a father who looked at his little girl like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Luca had never been looked at like that. As July rolled in, bringing a suffocating heat wave to Oildale, the club was gearing up for their annual summer barbecue. The compound was alive with activity. Hogs were roasting on massive spits, kegs were being rolled into the yard, and bikers from neighboring chapters were riding in, their engines shaking the thin walls of Luca's trailer. Brenda had passed out on the sofa by noon that Saturday. Luca, his stomach rumbling with an empty ache, wandered out the back door. The smell of roasting meat from the clubhouse was intoxicating, drawn like a moth to a flame. The 6-year-old dragged a discarded milk crate to the chain-link fence, climbed up, and peered over the top. He saw Charlotte playing in the dirt near the front gate, drawing with a piece of chalk while her father and the other men stood a few yards away, drinking beers and laughing. It was a picture of perfect, chaotic happiness. Luca rested his chin on the cold metal wire, just wanting to be near it. He didn't know that hell was about to roll down their quiet street. The street was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic thumping of classic rock echoing from the clubhouse speakers. Big Jasper was deep in conversation with Ghost about a recent run to Nevada. Charlotte had abandoned her chalk and was chasing a stray butterfly toward the heavy iron front gates, which had been left partially open for arriving brothers. Luca watched from his perch on the milk crate. He noticed the butterfly. He noticed Charlotte laughing. And then he noticed the matte black Suburban. It turned the corner off the main highway without its headlights on, creeping down the dusty street with an eerie, predatory slowness. Its windows were tinted pitch black. Even at 6 years old, growing up in Oildale taught you a few survival instincts. Luca felt a sudden, icy knot in his stomach. The vehicle didn't fit. It didn't sound right. As the Suburban rolled parallel to the open gates of the Hells Angels compound, the rear passenger window rolled down. The dark, ominous snout of a Mac 10 submachine gun poked through the opening. It was a hit. A rival syndicate, desperate to claim the territory, had decided to decapitate the charter by taking out its president at his own party. "Jasper!" Ghost roared, catching the glint of the barrel in the afternoon sun. But it was too late. The street erupted. Crack, 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 crack. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire tore through the lazy afternoon. Dust exploded from the dirt driveway. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. The bikers dove for cover, drawing their own weapons, shouting in a frenzy of adrenaline and panic. But Jasper's eyes weren't on the shooters. His heart stopped dead in his chest. Charlotte. She was standing frozen in the open gateway, a perfect, stationary target, her blue eyes wide with terror as bullets chewed up the asphalt around her. The shooters were adjusting their aim, sweeping the barrel right toward the little girl. Jasper lunged, his massive legs pumping, but he was 20 feet away. He was never going to make it. On the other side of the fence, Luca didn't think. He didn't weigh the options. He just saw the girl he had watched for months, the girl with the father who loved her, standing in the path of the fire. Luca scrambled over the chain-link fence, his ragged sneakers tearing on the wire. He hit the dirt on the clubhouse side and sprinted with a speed he didn't know he possessed. He wasn't big. He wasn't strong. But he was fast. Just as the Mac 10 swung toward Charlotte, spitting a deadly line of lead, Luca hit her. He didn't tackle her like a football player. He threw his frail, 80-pound body over hers, driving her to the ground just as the world tore apart. Big Jasper hit the dirt a split second later, screaming his daughter's name as Ghost, and the others opened, return fire, their heavy handguns barking in a chaotic symphony. The Suburban's tires shrieked against the pavement, burning rubber as the driver floored it, fleeing the hail of return fire. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. It was heavy, thick with the smell of cordite and the coppery tang of blood. "Charlotte!" Jasper roared, scrambling on his hands and knees through the dust. He reached the two small bodies tangled in the dirt. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder, hauling him off his daughter. Charlotte was crying hysterically, covered in dirt, but as Jasper frantically checked her over, he found no holes, no blood. She was terrified, but she was entirely unharmed. Jasper exhaled a ragged breath, pulling her into his chest. "Thank God," he choked out. "Thank God." Then, he looked down at the boy. Little Luca was lying on his back. His faded, oversized blue t-shirt was rapidly blossoming with dark, wet crimson. One bullet had shattered his left shoulder. Another had torn through his side. A third had clipped his hip. He was gasping for air, his tiny chest heaving irregularly, his face pale as milk under the layer of Oildale grime. Ghost ran over, his gun still drawn, but he stopped dead in his tracks. The grizzled biker, a man who had seen men stabbed, shot, and beaten, dropped to his knees, his face draining of color. "Christ almighty, Jasper," Ghost whispered. "It's a kid. It's just a little kid." Luca's blue eyes flickered up to the giant, bearded man holding the crying girl. He tried to speak, but only a wet, bubbling cough came out. Hey, look at me," Jasper said, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of his hardened outlaw persona. He pressed his massive, calloused hands over the boy's tiny chest, trying to stem the bleeding. The blood was warm, spilling over Jasper's knuckles, soaking into his Hells Angels patch. "Someone get a truck. Now! Get a goddamn truck!" The compound was in absolute chaos, but Jasper only saw the boy who had watched them from the dirt, the boy who had just bought Charlotte's life with his own. Luca blinked, his vision swimming, and for the first time in his short, invisible life, someone was holding him. The emergency room at Bakersfield Memorial Hospital had never seen anything like it. Within 20 minutes of the shooting, 50 Hells Angels had descended upon the hospital. They blocked the entrance with their bikes. Men covered in leather, tattoos, and road dirt paced the sterile white waiting room like caged tigers. The police arrived, but seeing the sheer mass of heavily armed, furious outlaws, they kept a tense distance, taking statements from the periphery. Big Jasper sat frozen in a plastic waiting room chair. He was covered in blood, Luca's blood. It was on his hands, smeared across his chest, drying in the fibers of his jeans. Charlotte was asleep, exhausted by trauma, tucked securely into the arms of one of the biker's wives in a secure back room. A doctor finally pushed through the double doors. He looked terrified of the crowd, but Jasper was on his feet in an instant, towering over the man. "The boy," Jasper demanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "How is he?" It's touch and go," the doctor stammered. He took 3 rounds. One collapsed his lung and nicked the spleen. The other 2 shattered his clavicle and pelvis. "We've got him stabilized for now, but he's lost a massive amount of blood. He's incredibly malnourished, which is complicating his recovery. We need to speak to his parents immediately regarding consent for further surgeries." Ghost stepped up beside Jasper. "I know where he lives, trailer 44, right behind the compound." Jasper turned his cold, dark eyes to his sergeant-at-arms. "Go get her. Bring her here. Now." It took Ghost less than 30 minutes. He walked back into the hospital, dragging a terrified, disheveled Brenda by the arm. She was shaking violently, sobering up fast under the terrifying glare of 50 bikers. Is Luca dead?" she cried out, shrinking away from Jasper. "He's fighting for his life," Jasper growled, stepping into her personal space. "Your boy saved my daughter. He took bullets meant for my blood. The doctors need you to sign papers so they can fix him." Brenda looked around the room, her eyes wide with panic. She didn't see a miracle. She didn't see heroism. She saw the police hovering near the doors. She saw giant, violent men. And she saw the crushing, impossible weight of hospital bills she could never pay. I can't," she whimpered, backing away. "I can't afford this. I didn't ask for this. He shouldn't have been over there. The cops are going to take him away from me anyway. They've been threatening it for months. I can't be involved in this." A dead silence fell over the waiting room. The bikers stared at her in sheer disbelief. In their world, family was everything. Loyalty was the only currency that mattered. To see a mother turn her back on a bleeding child was a sin beyond comprehension. "You're walking away?" Jasper asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down the spines of the toughest men in the room. "Your flesh and blood is in there, full of holes, and you're walking away? You people are crazy!" Brenda shrieked, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the doctor. "Do whatever. He's a ward of the state now. I'm done. I'm leaving." Before anyone could stop her, she turned and bolted out the sliding glass doors, disappearing into the Bakersfield night. Ghost cursed, starting to go after her, but Jasper threw out a massive arm, stopping him. "Let her go," Jasper said, his eyes burning with a dark, terrifying fire. He turned back to the doctor. "You need signatures?" "Legally, yes. If the mother has abandoned him, we have to contact Child Protective Services to make him a ward of the state before." "No," Jasper interrupted. He stepped closer to the doctor, unzipping his bloody leather cut. "You listen to me very carefully, Doc. That boy in there is not a ward of the state. He is not abandoned." Jasper pointed a thick, blood-stained finger at his own chest, right over the Hells Angels patch. "That boy bled for my family, which means he is my family. He belongs to the club now. You do every surgery. You use the best doctors in this damn state. You give him private rooms, around-the-clock nurses. The club pays for it all, in cash." The doctor swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I will get the paperwork for emergency temporary guardianship. Given the mother's verbal abandonment in front of witnesses and your willingness to assume financial and medical responsibility, we can bypass CPS for the immediate life-saving procedures." "Do it," Jasper commanded. He turned around to face his men. The charter members stood at attention. "Ghost, Wrench, secure this floor. Nobody goes in or out of that ICU without my say-so," Jasper barked, the president once again taking charge. Call the other charters. Let them know what happened. And Ghost? Yeah, boss? Jasper's eyes darkened, turning to black pits of pure rage. Find out who was driving that Suburban. I don't care if it takes a day, a week, or a year. I want every man, woman, and child associated with that hit brought to me. They shot a 6-year-old boy. They broke the rules. Now, we break them. A collective, dark murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered bikers. A storm was brewing in Oildale, but inside the sterile walls of the hospital, a tiny, broken boy was no longer invisible. He had just gained the most dangerous, fiercely loyal family on the planet. The fluorescent lights of Bakersfield Memorial Hospital buzzed like a nest of angry hornets, casting a sickly, pale glow over the third-floor intensive care unit. For 48 hours, the floor had been transformed into a heavily fortified bunker. Burly men in heavy leather cuts lined the hallways, their arms crossed, their faces grim masks of exhaustion and barely contained violence. The nurses, initially terrified by the invasion of the Hells Angels, soon realized that these outlaws were the most compliant, fiercely protective visitors they had ever encountered. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Nobody caused a scene. They simply waited. Inside room 312. Dr. Harrison Miller, a veteran trauma surgeon who had spent 2 tours in Fallujah before returning to the civilian world, stood over the small, fragile body of 6-year-old Luca. The boy was dwarfed by the hospital bed, a terrifying tangle of IV lines, chest tubes, and cardiac monitors keeping him tethered to the waking world. Big Jasper Lawson sat in a plastic chair beside the bed. The president of the club hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't even showered. The dried flakes of Luca's blood still crusted deep in the grooves of his calloused hands. "He's a fighter, Jasper," Dr. Miller said quietly, checking the drainage tube connected to Luca's side. The bullet that hit his chest missed the heart by less than half an inch. It collapsed his left lung and fractured 3 ribs. The round in his pelvis shattered the bone, but we managed to pin it. The real miracle is that the blood transfusions took. His system was so weak from chronic malnutrition that his heart almost gave out twice on the table. Jasper's jaw clenched so hard his teeth audibly ground together. He looked at the boy's pale, sunken cheeks, the dark circles bruised beneath his closed eyes. "Will he walk again, Doc?" "With extensive physical therapy. Yes, he's young. Bones heal faster at this age." Dr. Miller sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "But the psychological trauma, taking 3 bullets, growing up the way he clearly has, that's going to leave scars no scalpel can fix. He needs a stable environment, Jasper. If he goes back to that trailer park." "He's not going back," Jasper interrupted, his voice a gravelly, absolute decree. "He's mine now. The club's lawyer, Ronan Sloan, is already drawing up the paperwork. We're filing for emergency custody on the grounds of severe parental abandonment and gross negligence. I don't care how many judges I have to bribe or intimidate. This boy breathes my air now." Dr. Miller nodded slowly, knowing better than to argue with a man whose soul was entirely committed to a vow. While Jasper kept the vigil at the hospital, the streets of Oildale and Greater Kern County were burning under the quiet, methodical wrath of Declan Ghost O'Rourke. Ghost wasn't just the sergeant-at-arms. He was the club's apex predator, a man who moved in the shadows and extracted truth from the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Jasper had given him an order: find out who drove the matte black Suburban. Ghost started at the bottom. He knew every meth dealer, every low-level enforcer, and every chop shop operator from Bakersfield to Fresno. A hit this bold, attempting to assassinate a Hells Angels president in broad daylight, wasn't a random act of violence. It was a coordinated strike, which meant it required logistics. Logistics left a paper trail, or at the very least, a trail of whispers. On Tuesday night, 48 hours after the shooting, Ghost kicked in the reinforced steel door of a corrugated tin warehouse on the outskirts of Oildale. Inside, the smell of acetylene torches and stolen motor oil hung thick in the air. 2 men in greasy overalls scrambled for their weapons, but Ghost was already moving, his heavy .45 caliber pistol drawn and aimed squarely at the forehead of the shop's owner, a twitchy fence named Hector. "Where is it, Hector?" Ghost asked, his voice dead calm. which terrified the mechanic more than if he had been screaming. "Where is what, Ghost? I swear to God. Man, I don't want no trouble with the angels," Hector stammered, raising his grease-stained hands. A matte black Chevy Suburban. Tinted windows. Bullet holes in the rear quarter panel from where my brothers returned fire. Ghost stepped closer, the barrel of his gun pressing cold against Hector's temple. "You're the best chop shop in the county. A hot car from a high-profile hit doesn't go to a scrapyard. It comes to you to get cut into 1,000,000 untraceable pieces. Where is it?" Hector swallowed hard, his eyes darting to a massive blue tarp draped over a vehicle in the corner of the warehouse. Ghost didn't need to say another word. He walked over, grabbed the edge of the heavy plastic, and ripped it back. There it was, the Grim Reaper's chariot. The windows were blown out, the side riddled with bullet holes from Jasper and Ghost's return fire. They dropped it off Sunday night," Hector babbled, shaking violently. "Told me to crush the frame and torch the engine block. Paid me 10 grand in cash. I swear on my mother's life, Ghost, I didn't know it was the car from the clubhouse hit until I saw the news." "Who dropped it off?" Ghost demanded, inspecting the interior of the SUV. The heavy stench of bleach meant they had tried to wipe it down, but amateurs always made mistakes. "A guy named Reggie. He runs with the Iron Vipers up in Fresno," Hector confessed. "But Ghost, listen to me. Reggie is just a trigger man. He was bragging while I was counting the cash. He said they had a golden ticket. He said they knew exactly when Jasper would be in the yard, when the gates would be open, and when security would be relaxed for the barbecue." Ghost stopped. The blood in his veins ran ice cold. The Iron Vipers were a ruthless, up-and-coming syndicate dealing heavily in narcotics, but they weren't smart enough to bypass the Angels' security network on their own. The compound's gates were only ever opened for specific, vetted guests. Security was only relaxed during private, internal club events. "How did they know, Hector?" Ghost asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Reggie said they got a text," Hector whimpered. "From inside the club. He said the Angels had a rat who owed the Vipers $50,000 in gambling debts. The hit was the payoff to clear the ledger. Ghost didn't shoot Hector. He didn't have to. The mechanic was irrelevant now. Ghost holstered his weapon, walked out of the warehouse, and climbed onto his Harper. The roar of his engine tore through the quiet night as he sped back toward the hospital. The club had been violated, not just from the outside, but from within. By Wednesday morning, the mood in the hospital waiting room shifted from anxious waiting to a suffocating, lethal tension. Jasper had called a mandatory meeting of the senior officers in an empty conference room on the 3rd floor, away from the nurses' station. Around the laminate table stood Jasper, Ghost, and Theodore Wrench Gilbert. Wrench was the club's chief mechanic, a jovial, heavily tattooed man who had been with the charter for 8 years. He was the man who custom-made Charlotte's tiny leather vests. He was the man who always brought her coloring books. Jasper stood at the head of the table, his massive frame casting a long, dark shadow. "Talk to me, Ghost." Ghost reached into his leather cut and pulled out a small, cracked burner phone, tossing it onto the center of the table. It clattered loudly against the faux wood surface. "I tracked the Suburban, Iron Vipers out of Fresno, but they didn't act alone, boss," Ghost said, his eyes locking onto Wrench. "They had a schedule. They knew the front gates were rolling open at exactly 2 p.m. for the keg delivery. They knew you'd be standing in the front yard. They knew because someone sent a text to the hitmen at 1:55 p.m. Jasper's eyes darkened. "Who?" Ghost didn't look at Jasper. He kept his dead, furious gaze on Wrench. The text was traced back to a cell tower pinging off a phone purchased 3 weeks ago at a liquor store in Oildale. "I pulled the security footage from the store. A man bought it with cash. A man with a very distinct skull and wrench tattoo on his neck." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Wrench's face drained of all color. He looked at the burner phone on the table, then up at Jasper, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming terror. His hands began to shake. Jasper, listen to me," Wrench choked out, taking a step back. "You gotta understand. I was drowning. The Vipers. They hold the markers for the underground poker games in Fresno. I got in too deep. 50 grand. They were gonna kill my ex-wife. They were gonna burn my house down." Jasper didn't move. He didn't yell. His voice was a hollow, echoing void. "So you sold me to them. You sold your president." I didn't know Charlotte would be in the yard, Wrench screamed, tears spilling over his cheeks, his tough biker exterior completely shattering. I swear to God, Jasper, they just said they wanted to do a drive-by, send a message, scare the club. They said they wouldn't aim to kill. I thought you guys would just duck, and my debt would be cleared. When I saw Charlotte standing there, when I saw that kid take the bullets, I wanted to die. I wanted to put a gun in my own mouth. Jasper slowly walked around the table. Every step sounded like a judge's gavel slamming down in a courtroom. You brought the Reaper to my front door, Theodore, Jasper whispered, stopping inches from the trembling man. My daughter almost died because you couldn't lay off the cards. A 6-year-old boy, a kid who has nothing, had to do your job. He bled for my family while you sold us out for pocket change. Jasper, please, Wrench sobbed, falling to his knees, grabbing the hem of Jasper's leather cut. I'm your brother! I'm your brother! You're nothing, Jasper said. Jasper looked at Ghost and gave a slow, imperceptible nod. What happened next was swift, brutal, and entirely bound by the violent code of the Outlaw Motorcycle Club. Ghost stepped forward, drawing a heavy, serrated hunting knife from his belt. He grabbed Wrench by the collar of his jacket and hauled him to his feet. With 3 violent slashes, Ghost cut the Hells Angels' death head patch off Wrench's back. You are stripped of your patch. You are stripped of your name. Jasper delivered the sentence, his voice echoing off the sterile hospital walls. If I ever see your face in Oildale again, if I ever hear your name whispered in California, I will kill you myself. Get out. Wrench, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching the shredded remains of his jacket, stumbled out of the conference room. He was a ghost now, banished from the only family he had ever known, left to face the wrath of the Iron Vipers on his own. Justice had been served internally, but Jasper's soul remained hollow. He turned away from the door and walked back to the ICU. Vengeance didn't heal bullet wounds. The only thing that mattered now was the little boy fighting for his life in room 312. It was late Thursday evening, 5 days after the shooting, when the rhythmic, monotonous beeping of Luca's heart monitor suddenly hitched, its tempo changing. Jasper, who was asleep in the chair with his massive arms folded across his chest, jerked awake instantly. He leaned over the bed. Luca's eyelids fluttered. They were heavy, bruised, purple and yellow, fighting against the heavy sedatives pumping through his veins. Slowly, agonizingly, the brilliant blue eyes opened, squinting against the harsh hospital lights. Luca's throat was dry as sandpaper. He tried to swallow, but a sharp, burning pain radiated through his entire chest. He panicked, his breathing hitching, the heart monitor alarms beginning to trill. He remembered the loud noises. He remembered the dirt. He remembered the blinding, tearing pain. Hey, easy now. Look at me, son. A deep, rumbly voice cut through the fog of his panic. Luca turned his head slowly. Sitting beside him wasn't his mother. It wasn't the angry boyfriends. It was the giant man from across the fence. Big Jasper Lawson, the president. Jasper pressed a button on the side of the bed, calling for the nurse, then gently placed his massive, warm hand over Luca's tiny, uninjured hand. Am I dead? Luca whispered, his voice barely a rasp. Jasper's eyes, hard as flint for 5 days, suddenly welled with tears. One escaped, rolling down his bearded cheek to splash onto the white hospital sheet. No, buddy. You're not dead. You're safe. You're the safest kid in the whole damn world right now. Luca blinked, trying to process the information. The girl, Charlotte? She hasn't got a scratch on her, Jasper choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Because of you. You saved my whole world, Luca. You took the hit for her. Luca looked confused. In his mind, he had done something wrong. He had crossed the fence. He had ruined the party. Is my mom mad at me? The hospital costs money. She said she'd leave me if I got hurt. Jasper felt a spike of homicidal rage toward Brenda, but he forced his face to remain gentle. He leaned in close, his forehead resting against the metal railing of the bed. Listen to me very carefully, Luca, Jasper said, his tone absolute. Your mother isn't coming back, but you are never going to be alone again. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to be invisible. You belong to us now. You belong to me. Over the next 3 months, Bakersfield Memorial Hospital witnessed an unprecedented recovery. Luca didn't just survive. Under the fierce, unwavering protection of the Hells Angels, he began to thrive. He ate 3 square meals a day, carefully monitored by nutritionists, paid for in cash by the club. He underwent grueling physical therapy to rebuild his shattered shoulder and pelvis, and he never spent a single minute alone. Bikers from across the state came to pay their respects to the 6-year-old boy who had displayed more courage than most grown men. They brought him Legos, comic books, and remote-controlled cars. Charlotte visited every afternoon after school, crawling carefully into his hospital bed to read him stories and play board games. Outside the hospital, attorney Ronan Sloan waged a ruthless, efficient legal war. He found Brenda in a cheap motel in Barstow, strung out and desperate. True to his reputation, Sloan didn't bother with drawn-out court battles. He placed a briefcase containing $10,000 in cash on the stained mattress, alongside a stack of legal documents relinquishing all parental rights and granting full legal guardianship to Anthony Big Jasper Lawson. Brenda signed the papers without reading them, took the money, and vanished. When the day finally came for Luca to be discharged, the hospital staff gathered at the entrance to watch. It was a scene straight out of a movie. Over 100 Harper-Davidsons lined the streets of Bakersfield, their engines idling in a thunderous, rolling roar that shook the windows of the building. The entire charter, along with visiting brothers from Nevada and Northern California, had shown up to escort their newest family member home. Jasper walked out of the sliding glass doors, carrying Luca in his arms. The boy was frail, still wearing a heavy brace around his torso and a sling on his arm, but he was smiling. It was a real, bright, unburdened smile. As Jasper stepped onto the pavement, the engines revved in a deafening salute. Ghost stepped forward, a wide grin breaking through his scarred face. He held out a small hanger. "Got a present for you, kid," Ghost said. Jasper set Luca down carefully on his good feet. Ghost draped a tiny, custom-made leather vest over the boy's uninjured shoulder. It was made of the finest black leather, stitched perfectly to fit his small frame. On the back, it didn't have the full winged death head that was reserved for patched adult members, but it carried a special, undeniable mark of belonging. In heavy white letters across the center, the rocker read, "Blood Brother." Below it, a smaller patch simply said, "Oildale Charter." Luca ran his fingers over the thick leather, his eyes wide with awe. He looked up at Jasper, the man who was legally his father now. "Is this mine?" Luca asked softly. "Forever," Jasper replied, kneeling down so he was eye level with the boy. He adjusted the vest, his rough hands gentle against the boy's bandages. "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, Luca. You bled for us. Now, this entire club will bleed for you. You're home." Luca threw his good arm around Jasper's thick neck, burying his face in the man's chest. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking through the diamond holes of a chain-link fence. He was standing on the inside. Jasper lifted the boy into the air, settling him safely onto the gas tank of his massive custom chopper, right in front of the saddle. Charlotte, wearing her matching vest, climbed on behind her father, wrapping her arms tightly around Jasper's waist. Jasper kicked the motorcycle into gear. The heavy V-twin engine roared to life, a sound that no longer terrified the boy from Trailer 44, but instead sounded like a lullaby of absolute safety. With a thunderous roar, the massive convoy of outlaws pulled away from the hospital, riding down the sun-baked streets of California. They rode not as a gang, but as a heavily armed, fiercely loyal family, protecting the tiny, broken boy who had taught them the truest meaning of sacrifice. Luca Lawson rode at the front of the pack, the wind in his face, a brother in blood, an invisible boy seen by the whole world. If this incredible story of unyielding loyalty, shocking betrayal, and true brotherhood touched your heart, let us know. Real family isn't always determined by the blood in your veins. Sometimes, it's defined by the people willing to stand in the line of fire for you when you need it most. Luca's journey from an invisible, neglected boy to the most protected kid in California proves that heroes come in the smallest sizes. We bring you Powerful, gripping real-life stories like this every single week. Don't miss out on the next jaw-dropping tale. Please hit that like button to honor Luca's bravery. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the message of true loyalty, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable, true-to-life dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have risked it all to save a stranger? See you in the next one.